Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really fun comparison for you guys from two real titans within that entry level to mid range segment. One from Seiko and one from Hamilton. In your left, you see the Seiko Prospex Baby Alpinist, and on the right hand side, you see your Hamilton Khaki Field Murph 38. And I think these are very comparable. Not only are they field oriented watches that both clock in at about 38 millimeters, they also do have cathedral hands and warmer tone indexing and lume in terms of that bit of vintage look on there. And although the Alpinist is available in a bunch of different configurations, I felt that this SPB 159 would be the closest match in terms of really leveling the playing field. I even swapped out the straps so they have matching straps here from Strap Mill Canada. Check the channel history for the full reviews on these straps, but I think they're great and they pair really well. And of course that vintage upper stitch really flows well with the ivory tones on the dial. So I think that these of course would be and could be cross shopped against each other, although I will say of course the Hamilton being something more nostalgic from a movie, while the Seiko is more nostalgic from the older JDM only Alpinist release. But now those are internationally released and available in various iterations and combinations, but so I think for different reasons these are still, I think, really well paired. So with that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and take a closer look. All right guys, so as you can see, these are just lovely pieces, and especially to have them kind of go head to head, toe to toe, I think that they do offer a very similar wear profile, as well as, I mean, just the basics. Like they even have display case backs and cathedral hands, and just a very similar theme and use case. But let's go ahead and start off a little bit with the history. So Seiko was founded back in 1881 out of Japan, of course, while Hamilton was originally founded in 1892 out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but now is Swiss made and falls underneath the Swatch Group. Oh, there's a little bit of dust on that dial and some fingerprints. Let me wipe that there, and we'll get some talking done while we just have these next to each other for you guys to enjoy that moment of zen, seeing them synchronized in the second's hand, and seeing those cathedral hands set to each other, I think is a lot of fun and quite soothing. So while we mentioned, of course, the Alpinist is an adventurer's watch, extension of the original line dating all the way back to the late 1950s, the Khaki Field also has been around for quite some time, but this particular Murph is one of science fiction's most famous watches, or at least it pays a tribute to it, known as the Murph. And now it's just been sized down to fit into I think, a more field watch like 38 millimeter case. Honestly, if you take a look at field watches traditionally, they are quite small. And for me, having spent almost 10 years in the Marine Corps, I will say field watches are typically on the small side because you don't really want them getting in the way of your gear or anything like that. Of course, it's nice to have a chunky diver every once in a while, something that's really tough. But when it comes to strictly field duty, typically a field watch is going to range a bit smaller, which both of these do a great job in terms of kind of fulfilling that archetype. Now, getting into the crystals, they're both sapphire and they're both domed, although the Seiko has a single dome, so you can see there is a bit of distortion. That just means it's domed on the outside but not on the underside, while the Hamilton is double domed, so you're going to have really no distortion at very harsh angles, so it's going to maintain legibility a bit better. Also, the Seiko has a screw down crown, whereas it's a push-pull crown for the Hamilton. You're getting 200 meters of water resistance versus 100 meters of water resistance. Do you really need 200 meters of water resistance for a field watch? Absolutely not, but it's definitely worth mentioning. And then you get down into these movements here, guys. Again, very similar, both beating at 3 hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour. One has a 70-hour power reserve on the Seiko, and the other has a 70-hour power. Oh, I'm sorry, an 80-hour power reserve when you talk about the Hamilton. So the Hamilton will edge that out, and I will say that the Hamilton, or really just any Swatch Group Powermatic 80 type of movement, which this is based off of, will typically be running a little bit better out of the gates from what I've seen reported. But if you look, there's no manual adjustment there. So if you did need to get it adjusted, you would have to send it back to the Swatch Group. Whereas here, if you needed to adjust your Seiko movement, the 6R35 in here, you could manually do that. So that is nice. And again, it's just a bit of a trade-off. So it's not like there's anybody that's a clear, Jeez, I'm just going to be wiping these down all day, won't I? So there's not really a clear winner or loser, again, and just for various reasons, right? So you get a screw down crown here, but it's not signed. You get a push pull crown, but it is signed. So there's, again, little trade-offs here and there. So for fans of either brand, you will be absolutely, thrilled. Also, printed indices and indexing across both. One thing also to mention, I would say probably in terms of the crystal here, let's give it a little. The anti-reflective coating on the Hamilton is probably not quite as good. If you guys can see right here, obviously, I'm not saying it's going to negotiate the studio light, but if you can see the faint kind of reflection, you can see the dark shadow of the camera lens, and then the room, the ceiling, that I'm in, which is a white ceiling, shows up more there, versus if you were to do that here, not quite as much. So you can see the anti-reflective treatment on the Seiko is a little bit better. So even when it comes down to single dome versus double dome, I prefer double dome, but the the application of the anti-reflective coating is better. So, there we go again. And then even when it comes down to the loom here, guys, here you're going to get loom plops. So there's less because those numerals are not loomed. Here you're going to get loom all over the numerals, right? The Arabics, but it's a weaker loom. So it's like you're going to get stronger loom, but it's smaller. You're going to get, weaker loom, but larger. So actually, let me just, I'm not even going to charge these. So let's just turn off the light real quick so you guys can see the difference, right? So even with no charge, the Seiko, man, it's glowing. And also an interesting thing for the, baby Alpinist line is that you're going to be getting that blue tinted loom, which is great. Here you're going to see, of course, that old radium superluminova, which is, and by comparison, paling by comparison. Also, you're getting a loomed seconds hand on the Alpinist versus no loom seconds hand on the Hamilton. And I guess that's kind of fair, though. A good loom seconds hand lets you know your watch is running. If you were underwater, let's say, which you could be with this one because the screw down crown, although you could definitely be submerged in water with 100 meters of water resistance. It's just, you can't guarantee that this crown is going to be pushed in because there's no screw down capability. Since it's non-threaded, it's push-pull, which means that although, yes, you could submerge this, since you can't guarantee that the crown will stay engaged, you can't really guarantee the water resistance. So that's something that is tough there. But with all that said, let's actually get these on wrist and compare how they wear. Okay, as you can see on my 7¼ to 7½ inch wrist, really, really nice for the baby Alpinist. Of course, if I get the camera, the watch a little bit close to the camera, you're gonna get a lot of lens distortion. It's gonna appear larger. But if I keep it down here, you can see that it actually fits quite nicely. So nice and centered. Great, you know, and you can see that distortion coming into play on the crystal. But you can also see some great contouring on the case, definitely more complex by comparison to here. Bam, a lot more simple. Again, a little distorted. So what we'll do is we'll keep it down a little bit lower and we'll tighten the shot up just so you guys can get a good idea of how this is going to, you know, look with a truer aspect ratio on the wrist. Very, very nice, but you can also see definitely fits a bit flatter because it is a bit thinner. So the Seiko is going to be just under 13 millimeters at 12.9, whereas this is going to be at 11.2 millimeters. So a good amount thinner. Check that out. Look at the thinness. But again, only 100 meters of water resistance. Versus here, although it's a little bit thicker, is going to be more robust and feel more like kind of, you know, a true go anywhere, do anything type of situation. Versus here, you're going to be more of kind of a true traditional field watch by comparison. So let's get them both in the screen here. I will say that wearing either of these watches, definitely, again, very similar wear experience, although the dial on the Hamilton is larger, so it's going to have more presence, as well as it being thinner is going to spread that visual weight, so it's going to appear larger on the wrist, although it does have, I'd say, you know, the way that it balances that is by having those full numerals all the way around, which does, you know, eat up some of the space on the dial so it doesn't feel overly spacious. Versus on this side, you can see it is smaller, and it feels a bit smaller because it's a little bit taller. So it's going to be, you know, working tricks and whatnot with the visual kind of aspects on it. But I'd say they both wear. If you have a 38 in mind, this Seiko will probably wear a little bit smaller. On the smaller side, when you think 38, honestly, like the bezel itself is only a 36 and some change. So on this side, though, definitely going to be more true to a 38. If anything, maybe even wear a little bit larger just because of how thin and flat it is. So that's going to do something to you as well. So although we did get a quick, you know, little shot of the loom earlier, by comparison, I'll do some low light transitions still and kind of close this out on that note so that you guys can just get a nice idea of, you know, how this will also render in less than optimal lighting. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. And who doesn't enjoy a good loom battle? Check that out, guys. Both very nice, very legible. This time I did give them a bit of a charge right before shutting off the lights, so the Hamilton should be performing a little bit better than it did earlier on without any charge. And plus they were under the studio lights for a little bit longer, so, you know, hopefully it did absorb a little bit. Of course, these would both be much brighter if I just wore them outside for 10-20 minutes and they were able to get a full charge from the sun versus, you know, one of my little pocket torches, aka EDC flashlights. But you can see here, even in the kind of mixed lighting condition, check that out. You can actually, the crazy thing is, you can actually see the numerals, although they're non-loomed, on the Seiko. So that's very interesting. And of course, you can see them on the Hamilton because they are loomed. But that is very interesting. So, of course, we do like to see what these look like in this kind of transitional lighting, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you can be coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree, maybe spending time in your favorite automobile or something like that. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to even include some harsh lighting here, which typically could expose, you know, it's very high contrast. You can see a little bit of the cloudiness just from, you know, the oils from my fingerprints on those high polished sections. But then you also see the way that the light navigates itself around these dials, whereas although they're both matte, one has a texture. Check out the texturing that's on the Seiko, which can kind of wash out the dial from time to time there. But luckily, because of the offset with that tinted printing on the dial, it's not going to completely wash out. So that's pretty smart on their side. And then you don't really have to worry about that on the Hammy. There you're going to see some really cool, like, oh, it almost looks like deep inky black. But, you know, it is truly more of just a flat matte black affair. And then of course you can see that beautiful sheen and luster on the Horween shell cordovan premium straps from Strap Mill Canada. So big shout out to them for just being awesome and offering very, very cool products at not super expensive pricing, especially if you don't live in Canada, because then you can get them for cheaper because the US dollar is a little bit stronger than the Canadian dollar. So getting into closing thoughts here, guys. Yes, these are comparable. I feel like everybody, depending on when this Hamilton was released, there's been a lot of comments about the Seiko Baby Alpinist or the Alpinist in general. Even also on the more expensive side, you could think of something like the Oris Big Crown Pointer Date. And I think those are all, comparable options within this space. I think, of course, that Oris is going to give you a little bit less bang per buck in terms of your value. I think these two are going to give you a lot of value, right? The Hamilton, in that it is quite iconic, and if you are a cinema buff, it's going to make you like this even more. Or if you're just a real field watch collector, then this is going to really speak to you because of its kind of unique aesthetic. Whereas the Alpinist is more... although it is meant to be kind of an outdoors and a field watch, it definitely goes the further way in terms of functionality with a screw down crown and the additional water resistance to really feel like something that is more of an adventurer's watch, right? Like this I feel like would be more in line with, although most adventurers watches are 100 meters of water resistance. I mean, I just feel like the Seiko Alpinist line, they just do a great job of really pumping that up and saying, hey, well, let's be a little bit overbuilt. Let's overdo it. So yeah, it's very, very interesting how comparable these two are. And then again, it's little trade-offs. Signed crown versus screw down crown, right? 70-hour power reserve versus 80-hour power reserve. But one can be adjusted locally and one cannot. So that's something. And then one's a little bit thinner and is going to wear a little bit larger, while the other is a little bit thicker and is going to wear a little bit smaller, although they're both 38s and have, similar lug to lug lengths. The Seiko being at just under 46 millimeters at 45.9, and then the Hamilton actually being a little bit shorter at just 44.4 millimeters, so just under 45. So there's just little areas here and there. And I will say that I did try a bracelet, actually the OEM Seiko bracelet on the Khaki here, and it fit well. And one of the reasons why it did is because it did have a shorter end link, which didn't protrude, whereas there are actually a lot of aftermarket Alpinist bracelets where they try to make the end link sit a little bit more flush with the lugs. I will say those ones probably won't work because they're going to be a little bit too long, and the way it's going to seat on these shorter lugs of the Hamilton, it's just going to protrude out and it's not going to flow well with the case. But I am talking to Uncle Seiko right now about hopefully getting a President bracelet in to see how that fits on the Hamilton. You guys already saw this Baby Alpinist, not this particular one, but I do have another variation that the gilt and kind of chocolatey brown dial that I put on an Uncle Seiko Jubilee, which was an amazing pairing, which I will probably never take off because it's just that good. But with all that said, guys, this was a bit of a ramble, but that's what I'm known for. If you wanted the short, concise stuff, then look at my shorts. And I mean the YouTube shorts, not my actual... That's just weird. Why did you go there? Why did your mind go there? Okay. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please leave a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.